Hey everyone, welcome to Software Engineering Mini Lectures, episode number 6. My name is Adam Corbin, and I'll be talking about the roles of using software tooling and some of my experiences. So the first thing I want to jump into and talk about is really when you start thinking about tooling, when you're developing a product or about to start to develop a product, I really would take a hard look at what the industry is doing within your industry and maybe even outside your industry. So for example, I work in aviation, and it's a very safety critical we work on very safety critical programs. So because of that, there are certain tools that the industry uses, but such as, for example, a lot of the programs use Ada for the language because it's a very strict and safe type, and how it works is you have to certify a compiler in order to use it for a certain program. And so doing a certification of a compiler is very expensive. So we kind of get stuck into potentially using some old tools, even though it's industry standard. So that's just something that you want to make sure that you want to take a look at within your industry, maybe even outside your industry, and test them out, and even over time revisit it. So one thing I do want to bring up is, yes, in aviation we do use languages such as Ada, but the things built around Ada can be very outdated, and there are really very good tools around it, such as like the IDEs to do the development. And so since I like to try different things, and for example, I've worked on a few different Android applications, and using the Java language and Kotlin language and the tools around that, such as Android Studio and IntelliJ and the company JetBrains who developed them, make it so it's actually really nice and convenient to point out problems that you have, efficiencies, and a lot of things are built into tools which make development much faster. And I know something like that probably wouldn't run in an aviation system, but taking those ideas and seeing if we can push the bounds, especially in aviation, that could potentially increase efficiency, might be something to look into. So just as a quick example, I saw that that Android Studio and really IntelliJ, they have a lot of really good refactoring tools, whereas something like the Eclipse, because it doesn't have all the great hooks for the Ada language, doing refactoring such as the simple naming across the whole project can be very challenging. I was working with a couple colleagues of mine that did some renaming and took many hours, and I know for a fact that if we had used different tools in different languages, that concept would have definitely been in the order of minutes, not hours. So I have experienced that even though the industry standard might be using a certain thing, you might want to compare outside of the industry to just see what's going on. So that's my little hot take on industry standard tools. And then the next I want to touch up on is custom tools. So I personally have created many Python scripts to make my job more efficient and to help out other people, and they're really nice, but I have found that that's just another thing you really have to maintain. So that I always try to think is, before I go and create some custom tool, is it really necessary to do what we're doing? Is it something that the customer is paying for? And really dive in deep and question about if this thing is really valuable. And so about custom tools, you want to make sure that you pick something, or if you need to really come up with something, really question like, is there something out there that we could probably leverage that might get us like 80-90% of the way? So I would highly recommend doing that, because then it's something you don't have to maintain. Maybe it costs a little bit more, but now projects can really get wrapped up around the axle on developing these custom tools and not really focusing on the end product, on developing the product. So So I think getting the best tools you can to leverage your job is the best thing, and especially to focus on the project at hand. So that's something to really think about and consider for custom tools. Is they can be nice and they can get the job done, but then that's another extra thing you have to maintain, and you can end up becoming very complex very fast. And you're not focusing on developing a product, you're developing products to develop the product. So in some cases you just really can't get around it, but just something to think about. So the next thing I really want to jump into is some examples that I have found. So one thing that one of the projects I worked on, they ended up developing a custom review tool, really because for DO-178 you have to have a lot of the artifacts laying flat, and it's really easy to go back and view those artifacts. And so in aviation, I haven't seen too many examples, especially for the higher level DO-178 projects, A, B, C type of stuff. Now within the tools, that there's like tools teams that develop tools for aviation, they do use some built-in review tools such as like GitHub or GitLab, and so that's pretty nice and convenient to do those type of reviews. But I have seen a project develop their own type of review system, and really because it was like they think that they're a little bit special case in that it seemed like it made sense to kind of like create this review tool where you select the files and you pick the versions, and then it kind of like pops up in a diff tool, and you can kind of then put your comments into some little box. But it did work, but it's another thing to maintain, because I personally had to support this tool that was living probably many years, and there wasn't many people that the person that created it had moved on, and there wasn't really too much information other than it was pretty complex to get it working. So I know for a fact that really we need to go back and revisit certain tools and check out, see what's going on in the industry to see if we can actually improve on what we're currently doing. So that's something that I found that we could have done a better job at moving towards industry standard tools if we were to revisit what we are currently doing. So that's another thing, is just definitely revisit, see what you're doing that makes sense. So the next thing is requirements. So this is in using IBM's DOORS. So this is something that aviation industry and probably other industry, maybe auto industry, has been using quite a while. And the DOORS, it's a simple system to capture requirements and traceability, to have unique identified requirements for requirements and test cases usually. Now, IBM has come up with a new system called DOORS Next Gen, but just really haven't found the capabilities that what the regular DOORS has to offer. And it's all web-based, which can be a nice thing, but then you clearly can't work offline in requirements or test cases. So I think that kind of lacks there. So one thing that I have found that DOORS does do a good job is traceability, but when you start getting into, if you think about an agile mindset and trying to complete a feature from end to end and then move on to the next feature, including like formal reviews and artifacts and stuff like that, which is, in my personal opinion, the direction that we probably want to go, or a project should go, instead of doing a full waterfall method where you kind of like develop all your requirements, then you're doing your design and then doing all this code and then doing all the tests. It just leaves a lot of that, doing that mindset or doing that method just leaves a lot of room for trying to cobble everything together at the end and seeing if it works. So I think that building off of working blocks and adding to that is a little bit better method. So this is what we found using DOORS. In doing those formal reviews, you have to capture these baselines, and so since DOORS is a separate repository as usually your code and your test procedures, your design, you have to capture these multiple baselines and and can be pretty challenging to be able to do that in doors, because doors, the way it does it, the keeping track of the history with it does do keeping track of the history, but being able to do differences over requirements over time can be actually pretty challenging. You have to have hopefully they have the plugins built in where you can do the diffs, but sometimes it's not. You might have to roll your own DXL scripts, and there aren't too many people out there that actually know DXL, and finding the documentation is pretty challenging. And to be able to create it, it's a challenge. So starting to come up with interesting concepts out there, doing requirements in text-based form, whether it's Markdown or Doxygen, and doing that traceability. That's one thing that it can be a challenge, is doing traceability and unique identifiers. But what that does lead us to is to have requirements and test cases and everything, all the design, all within one repository, within like a Git repository. And so that kind of gives a similar review strategy. You can view the diffs over time with the revisions, and it's an interesting way of thinking that I'm trying to push the bounds on my current project. And so it's something that I think that we might not have to leverage the industry standard tools, maybe other industry standard tools that are outside, to be able to the requirements to be able to support a better way of being able to do agile type development. So it's something that's interesting, that I think that it is a combination using custom tools and a combination of using industry standard customer off-the-shelf tools. So yeah, so those are some examples. Oh yeah, I guess another talk about that, if we do type of move everything over to the one repository, might help with product line engineering, which is the next subject I'll talk about. So I won't touch up on that, but we'll dive into that next time. So hopefully you enjoyed the roles of using software tooling, and if you ever need to contact me, acorbin3@gmail or fau.com. Hope you enjoyed this. Thanks.